Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third session in our 5-part series, Let's Talk, Closing the Racial Gap in STEM, focusing on middle school. I'm Martha McCabe, Executive Director of the Casey STEM Alliance, and on behalf of our advisory board, funders, STEM Connect Casey Ecosystem Leadership Team, we thank you for joining us today for an engaging and real conversation. Our team at the Casey STEM Alliance has been on a journey involving executive leadership, training, staff development to better understand systemic racism, implicit bias that creates education and economic inequities impacting the students and families, as well as gatekeeping right here in Kansas City. And to understand what our role can be to support those doing this work and to become even stronger partners and allies. This series represents our efforts in creating a bigger and deeper commitment to this work. And we consider this series of 5 sessions as design thinking in action as we listen to our panelists. In celebration of Pride Month, as an ally, 4 words come to my mind as I think about the youth and adults we are honored and proud to reach and serve alongside in our Kansas City STEM ecosystem. Those words are rock stars, confident, powerful, unique. These words also represent our students of color, and we must work so that each student sees these words in themselves and that they can make significant contributions using STEM skills to solve problems and to make the world a better place for all of us and to create an economic viability for themselves so they can continue to pursue their passions. As we look for ways to reach all students and connect the valued partners in closing the racial gap in STEM, the Kansas City STEM Alliance is delighted to have an outstanding individual leading this work for our ecosystem, Christina Chandler. Chrissy is a teacher, a computer scientist, an IT professional, and serves as the program delivery partner for First Lego League. Her passion for education and inspiring young people to explore and engage in STEM has been an incredible gift to them, but also to us here at the Casey STEM Alliance and to our work. We look forward to her leadership as the STEM Alliance embraces even more initiatives to ensure that all young people have the opportunity to explore the world of STEM. I'm delighted to introduce to you Christina Chandler.
Thank you so much, Martha, for that wonderful introduction. And I am so excited to take the lead in this work. The Casey STEM Alliance's work has always been done through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But now it's time to take that work to the next level, making sure all of our students, to echo Martha's words, are confident, unique, and powerful rock stars, have access to rich and rigorous STEM opportunities. That's always been a passion of mine. And now I have the opportunity to turn that passion into action, working alongside the Casey STEM Alliance as we continue to build on the work that's already being done and ensure that equitable strategies are in place to make sure that all of our students are prepared for our future STEM workforce. I'm so excited about this work, and I look forward to working alongside each of you. And now it is my privilege to introduce Andrea Ellis, Director of Strategic Learning for the Kansas City Public Library System, to moderate this series. Her work and advocacy around making sure that all students have access to diverse learning opportunities is helping to move the needle forward for the students in our region. Thank you so much for your work, Andrea. And now I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Chrissy. As mentioned, I am Andrea Ellis, the Director of Strategic Learning at the Kansas City Public Library and a Casey STEM Alliance board member. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. This is the third of 5 conversations that will be hosted every Wednesday until June 16th from 11:30 to 12:30 p.m. The focus of this series is to name and acknowledge the barriers to success in STEM for individuals of color, and to recognize and honor where there have been both systemic and personal successes in addressing these barriers. So we'll do a little housekeeping first. Both the chat and the Q&A are active. If you have questions specifically for the panelists, please use the Q&A because that will make it so much easier for our team to be able to access it when we go into the Q&A part of this series. The chat use as normal, but we would also ask if you have any resources that you think would be useful for other participants, please include those also in the chat, because we're going to put all of that together and then share it back out at the end of the series. And then the last note is that there will be an additional Q&A after we formally adjourn at 12:30. So we want to make sure we adjourn at 12:30 for those who just have an hour's worth of time. But for those who could stay an additional 10 minutes, if the panelists are willing and some participants are willing, we will use that time to ask them more questions that we weren't able to get to during our allotted time. So now I am going to introduce Ann Zimmerman, who has been the graphic recorder for this series. She is going to give us a brief recap of the conversation that we had last week. Ann?
Thank you, Andrea. And it's so wonderful to be here again with you today. Terry is going to share the illustration from last week. And I'll just walk you through this really quickly. It was a wonderful, really dynamic conversation. And we started with Derek Pruitt, who was a teacher and coach. And he asked us to imagine, what if there were no inequities in STEM? And what if everyone did have access? And he was introduced to First Robotics and First Lego League several years ago. And he realized there were just simply not enough young people of color participating. So he jumped in, he started some teams. Over the course of the following years, he developed up to 8 teams because he couldn't say no, and he didn't want to say no to giving these young people an opportunity to try something new. And in that, it was a matter of elevating the status of those activities so that these kids really felt like rock stars. So thank you to Derek for actually stepping into that challenge. But he also recognized that there were lots of problems. Many teachers lack STEM expertise. There are often low expectations for kids of color. Very often, parents, teachers don't even understand the benefit of STEM and STEM jobs as potential careers. And there was this just an inability for kids to fail forward and feel comfortable in that as a learning strategy. He also pointed out the lack of resources and that parents just don't understand the value of STEM. You could see my little red schoolhouse, not many of those left, but the idea really was powerful that we had to get schools reinvesting and investing in new STEM programs for students, especially in the urban core and students of color. And that we have to work to help those parents understand the value of STEM and reinforce that with their students that they can do STEM. So Derek concluded his comments with a wonderful metaphor about the tree of life. And so I sort of pulled some of this together to look at what is the foundation and the roots that we need to have in place of inquiry-based approaches, quality teachers, high accountability for the way we're teaching and for our students, as well as parental support. The latter represents just this youth development journey that we need to see students, believe in them, challenge them, and then celebrate them in their successes. And hopefully they do attain this wonderful life-giving tree so that they can explore STEM, that they have the resources and programs, that there's hope in their future, and that they have career options, and we can actually level the playing field. That set the stage for a fantastic panel. And I used gears last week, because we were talking about robotics and we were gearing these students up in the elementary space to build their STEM identity. And so we started with Brandon Chandler, who's a high school student, who just told us his very real-time journey of starting in First Lego League and then moving on to First Robotics, and now even thinking about how that's going to impact his future. And one of Derek's comments was, if kids don't know about it, then how do they know that this is an option? So we need to invite young people to consider these opportunities. So thank you to Chandler for sharing his story, and then actually talking about his research project in FLL is helping him think about becoming a medical researcher in the future. Kenise, who is a principal in KCK Public Schools, talked about the very important role of leadership and setting this vision for how do we rethink education, How do we bring exciting new technology into the classroom, into the school setting, and open doors so that we really have the opportunity for young people to try something new? And she threw out this challenge to districts. We have to do more. What can we do to bring more financial resources to this? And how do we leverage the community and other funders in that? Then we had, let me see, We Code KC. We had the dynamic Tammy Buckner here to talk about the power of after school time, and that these technologies can lead to future careers that are great careers and that are very in demand in the future. There was also a wonderful conversation about how do we leverage exciting entry points? Can we bring a robot to the basketball team, to the basketball game at halftime and shoot baskets to show kids that there are other ways to engage in STEM? Do we connect through music, through exciting new technologies? And that if we can build this interest and new skills and passions, that's going to open doors to opportunity for these young people. We have to reemphasize the value of STEM and give all kids access, and role models will play an important role in that so that kids can actually see themselves in these careers. So that's a quick spin through the photo. I hope you all enjoy that. I should have started in the middle just to say that we reinforced over and over this need to expose kids to not only this knowledge, but role models and mentors, technology, and quality programs that will help them close the racial gap. So I think that's about it. And I am looking forward to hearing about middle school today.
I think the concept of exposure was really huge in the elementary one, specifically because it was this idea that they're still young enough to be excited about learning. And this is the time when they're willing to try a lot of things, right? To be exposed to a lot of things in order to maybe choose a particular pathway. So thank you, Anne, for helping to highlight the key points that have come out of our previous conversation. After each conversation, we sent out a survey to all of you who participate. And one of the things that has come from the survey responses has been an interest in specific examples of how to draw more students of color into existing programs. That question has been addressed in our conversations, but maybe not directly enough. So I wanted to say that it may be that those answers will be more clear after the series has been completed and the summary document is created. An hour allows us to have a pretty thoughtful conversation, yet it doesn't allow the conversation to be so broad that everything gets covered. But ultimately, the plan from the KC STEM Alliance is to weave all of the series conversations together to create something that is more comprehensive than the individual parts. So today's discussion is focused on the middle school experience. Our panel includes informal educators, a college student who began her journey in middle school, and a district level science coordinator. They will introduce themselves after the keynote. Bios should have been sent to you in advance. So now let me introduce to you our keynote today. Crystal Faris is the Director of Youth and Family Engagement at the Kansas City Public Library and has been an advocate for youth development, project-based learning, and STEM exploration throughout her 30-plus years in youth librarianship. Crystal, take it away.
Thanks, Andrea. Let's see what I have to share this morning. It was fascinating to look at your drawings and to think about what I heard and what you chose to highlight. I think one of the things I wanted to address today is particular, I think for the elementary school, we talked about exposure. I think for the middle school brain, we want to talk even more about their input into what they want to learn. So as a youth librarian of more than 30 years, as Andrea said, I've spent much time studying child and adolescent development. And long ago and far away in 2002, PBS did a frontline special on the research that was being done inside the teenage brain, particularly the adolescent brain. And it sparked an interest in me. Actually, PBS has kept that episode available to you online. A simple Google search will bring it up, and they've added more information over the years and changed some of the things that they originally presented. But one of the things that caught my attention in particular is because as a librarian that works primarily with children and with teens, there'd been a lot of work done around those first 3 years, that 0 to 3, and the brain development that happens in a very young child, particularly the massive amount of synapses that are happening in the life of a toddler, primarily connected to their language development. Well, what the researchers were talking about in this frontline episode was that it happens again at puberty. Middle school is a time when we again have that massive amount of brain development. In a toddler, the brain development is also mirrored with their physical activity, and toddlers move a lot and speak a lot and touch everything a lot. So too do adolescents, and their physical activity is mirroring it. Maybe though, for adolescents, for those of us that are adults, it's not quite as cute as it is in a toddler. And yet, as toddlers crave adult connection, they need those adults to make the reinforce, I guess, not really to make, but to reinforce for them that what they are learning is valuable and their growth is valuable and they are valuable. So too do adolescents need that as their brain is making those connections. They may not overtly court that adult attention as a toddler does, but they need that adult stability as they explore and connect to their peers. Interestingly, about the same time as I saw that special in 2002, I was introduced to the Search Institute, which has done also a significant amount of research around the developmental assets that a teen and also a child need in their growth and reaching healthy adulthood. And one of the things that stood out to me and continues to stand out to me as I've done this work is that a teenager, tween, moving into teen, need at least 2 relationships with adults that are not related to them to become healthy, mature adults. Think about that for a moment. They need relationships with adults, healthy relationships with adults who are not related to them. And those healthy relationships are about introducing them to new ideas and reinforcing for them that they are valuable and that their opinion is valued. Here's where, for me, youth input is so very important. I, as an adult who care about adolescent development, need to be willing to listen to youth. Our role is to introduce, but our role is also to actively listen as educators, as informal educators, as simply people who care about the youth of our community. My experience has shown that actively listening means physically listening. I was very good at frustrating my own children with all the things I did while I was listening to them talk. And then they would say, "You're not listening at all." And I would be able to repeat back almost word for word what they were saying, but I wasn't actively listening to them. I was physically doing other things and listening, but they didn't know as teenagers that I was truly focused in on them. As a young librarian sent to inner city Indianapolis, a branch in inner city Indianapolis, my branch manager, who had been there a long time, was from the community, was Black, rather raised me in the profession. I often call her my mother, librarian. She was that adult for me. And one of the things that she said to me very early in my time there is that the children were not necessarily going to trust me, a white woman who suddenly appeared in their community, unless I showed them that these children were valuable to me, that these children had interesting things to say, and I was willing to actively listen to what they had to say. And I was willing to give them my time. She said to me that my time was not to be spent primarily in making sure the books were in the right place on the shelves, or that there were fun decorations and displays. My time was to be actively spent listening to the children and to the teens who came into the library and finding them in the community and actively listening to them. This was a world of education for me. Listening brought more children and teens to the library. My listening brought much more engaging programs because they helped me plan them. My listening brought me renewed joy in discovery and learning. For example, how many times can a youth librarian be as excited as the children discovering simple science experiments? One of the things that we did one summer was middle schoolers who were particularly excited about a volcano that they had built to exploded it every day at 2 p.m. with different groups of children so that the children could experience it for themselves. The volcano looked a little the worse for wear by the end of the summer, but we all were excited about what we had done and what we had created. It also meant pulling my expertise back so that the tween, teen, child can be the teacher and celebrate their knowledge. I think one of the things that I'm always interested in is that people often are surprised that the library does these kinds of things. Libraries have a reputation for being very quiet places, and for being repositories of books that you can come in and check out. I think too that libraries have a unique place in a city. Libraries are, here in the Kansas City metro area, there is a library within just about every, with 2 miles of every person. And libraries are a perfect place to build relationships, to grow your adolescent brain, and to discover the joy of learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal. Appreciate it. And if you don't mind staying on and joining our panel discussion, that would be great. And if our other panelists could go ahead and turn on their cameras, that would be wonderful. And so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is just introduce yourselves briefly. I'll just call on each of you to help make it move a little faster. Introduce yourself briefly, and maybe if you have one sentence or word about what you think is most important for us to address as it relates to closing the racial gap in STEM, particularly for middle school, if you could include that, that would be wonderful. So we'll start with Falania, I think I got it right that time, I hope. If you will introduce yourself, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Falania Johnson, and I will be starting my 2nd year at UMKC in the fall, majoring in accounting. I think it is important to talk about knowing when a particular STEM path isn't a good fit and how to find the right one.
Fantastic, thank you. Brittany.
Hello, everyone. My name is Britany Mojica. I'm a lead fabrication instructor here at Minddrive. I think that something that cannot be overstated in closing the racial gap in STEM is creating equity for all students in education.
Thank you, Brittany. Dr. Phil.
How are you doing? I'm Philip Jones. I'm the secondary science coordinator for Kansas City Public Schools. I'm also a secondary network manager over curriculum. And as far as closing the gap, 2 words that come to mind. One is demystify, and the other one is encouragement. And as we talk, I'll get a little bit more into that.
Fantastic. Thank you all and welcome. So let's start with Felania. If you could talk maybe about, I know you got started in STEM in middle school. So if you could talk about how you got introduced to it, what drew your attention and what kept you coming back.
Okay. Hi, when I was a middle school student, I met a woman named Anna Montgomery through my mom, and she was a part of STEM. So I'm like, oh, this is something that I may be interested in because I was interested in engineering. And it was a pretty fun thing to do because I had the chance to network with others and meet new people and get a chance to see where everyone else's point of views were from their career paths that they chose. So it was pretty fun.
And so you started in middle school, you got introduced to some individuals and got some different perspectives, and then you continued in high school?
So when I became a high school student, I was a senior at Purcell Academy of Fine and Performing Arts. I went to Manual Tech Careers and I did this engineering program. And basically we just did engineering things. And I just came to a point in my life where I was like, oh, okay, this is fun, but I just couldn't see myself doing it for the rest of my life. And I'm glad that I had the chance to get that experience while I was at high school. So that way I didn't change my mind at the last minute when I became a college student.
So what did you end up doing, if not engineering?
So instead of becoming an engineer, I did become an exploratory student, which means that I didn't have a declared major at the moment. And now I'm interested in becoming an accountant.
Okay, so you still stayed in the STEM field.
Yes.
Around a little bit. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Let's jump to Brittany for a moment. And Brittany, you also got involved doing hands-on building and making as a student first, and then moved into the role you're in. Can you talk about how you got involved and why you continue to be involved?
Sure. Well, I actually was a student here at the organization that I work at in high school. So I got to, explore learning through like mentoring and project-based learning through like classes like, FPV, racing drones, battle bots, welding art, esports, automotive design, digital content design. So I got to experience all these awesome classes and kind of, wanted to be a part of it. And luckily I was offered, a position here at Minddrive. So I get to do that pretty much every day and kind of keep on guiding students through their own path through exploring STEM related fields.
And you work specifically with middle school students, right? Can you
Yes,
tell me about what you do with them?
Sure. So I work directly. I'm a coach for our battle bots and esports. So we play like Minecraft. We do live streams and stuff like that. So, I work directly with students here in the Kansas City metro area. And I can see, with some of our students, like we've participated in Minecraft competitions, and we kind of start off doing a certain version of Minecraft, and some of our students need equipment delivered to themselves. And, at the end, when we're ready to get done with the competition, they switch, if they switch up for some of our students, the version, some of our students don't have that kind of help at home or maybe their parents don't really quite know how to work a computer. So this is where, kind of the closing the racial gap, where it needs to be addressed, and where some of our students need specific tools and assessments to help them succeed in completion of those programs.
Right. So just to clarify, because I think you had mentioned this before, you've had an experience where you were working on a certain software platform and your students were preparing and entering a competition, and then the powers that be that handle those competitions changed the software, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. So as I mentioned, this actually happened right here during the pandemic. So it wasn't too long ago, and it's already, kind of hard enough for certain students to get the equipment that they need, to train them and take the time to like show them how to do what they need to do in order to succeed in programs like that. So after spending pretty much a whole year preparing using this certain software, which is Minecraft Java, and then all of a sudden at the end, when we're getting ready to build the final product, they change it to another version of Minecraft. And so it's kind of hard because not all students have equal access to a person, right next to them, or access to the correct equipment or time. And so this is where, we come in as an organization and kind of try to fill that gap in helping them out through like stuff that normally other students would not have to deal with.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And that you're hitting on some things that have been brought up before too, about resources and equitable access. So thank you. And we'll come back to that. And now jumping to you, Dr. Phil, can you talk about, in general, when you're thinking about how to engage middle school students in STEM, kind of what is your pedagogy? How do you think?
So in thinking about just the whole conversation and going back to like my childhood, I'm going to be honest, trying to remember science in middle school, like in the classroom, is difficult. However, when I go back to that age period, I did a lot of things outside of the class. I grew up with my grandparents, and neither my grandmother nor my grandfather went to college. But my grandmother, and this is kind of crazy, was the candy lady for the block. So as the candy lady, especially, and I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. So let me put that out there first. So as the candy lady, especially when you live in an urban area, you don't have a convenience store to go to. So the candy lady is like your version of the person who sells things on the block. Well, with my grandmother, she would do a lot of cooking. So I'm there watching her do a lot of what she's going to be doing in the kitchen. And one of the things that I do remember is that she would always heat up water before putting sugar in to make these things called frozen cups. Just think of it as like a snow cone, just all syrup. And the reason that you do that, and I know it now, is because once you raise the temperature, you can get more sugar to go into solution. My grandfather would always be working on cars or something of that nature, and he would always have me involved. So for me, STEM actually started at home. Then once I got into like high school, it became even more intentional, because back then during the summertime, they would actually have these programs that allow you to work in some of the laboratories for the universities around New Orleans. So I remember being in labs, even as a freshman, and definitely as a senior, working with researchers, doing the research and understanding kind of like where science is going. So when I talk about demystifying, especially at the middle school level, it's really making science less about the high end, this is what you do in a laboratory, but science in a everyday frame. One of the things that I kind of talk to my teachers about is, with a lot of what's going on, there always are these everyday examples of how this plays out. Again, using the whole thing with salt. One thing that I tell some of the teachers is, talk to students about, well, why do you put salt in water before you put in pasta? And for students, they know that you do it and it's going to make the pasta better, but they just don't know why. Well, it's so that you can literally increase the boiling point, meaning that you have more water in the pot. Same thing with putting down salt when there's an ice storm, to make sure that the ice melts and stays as a liquid as opposed to a solid. So when we're really talking about making it engaging and exposure, sometimes the exposure is, where does science intersect with my everyday life? Now, it takes being excited about science to do this, but there's all these examples. And once you can show a student, especially at that age where, okay, now their mind, as you said, it's developing, it's going to that next level. It's where now I have an identity and I want to see where I fit in this entire schema that we call life. I want to see where I fit in community. I want to see where I fit in these various areas of industry. Or do I want to be a scientist? Do I want to be an engineer? When you start showing them,
it relevant, right?
Yes, exactly.
Sure.
Exactly.
So I'd like to, and feel free, all of you all, if you hear things that you think you have a question about, jump in. I don't have to be the only one to ask a question, but I think that that's a very valid point, is making it relevant. And also, as you mentioned, Dr. Phil, getting the teachers excited. So I'm curious to hear from you all, where you feel like you've had or seen strong experiences when an adult who is doing the work has gotten excited, and how that has been able to bring in the students' excitement. Go ahead, anyone. You feel like Felania? You want to?
Yes, okay. Again, when I was in middle school, I had a teacher named Michelle Burden, and she taught science. So I was really interested in the science class, of course, but I didn't take my grades seriously when I was in middle school. So I allowed myself to fail some exams, and I ended up getting a D for her class. And I want to say it was a term grade. So I'm over here crying. I'm like, what's going on? Can I please get my grade back up? So I ended up having to stay after school every single day to bring that grade up. But she taught me one thing that was important. And I just basically look at life now and I took my GPA and everything serious by the time I became a freshman in high school, because I realized that, if you don't take your grade serious, then your GPA is not going to be where you may want it to be. And after I got my grade up in her class, I just thanked her, because I'm like, if it wasn't for you, then I wouldn't be here as the valedictorian at Paseo. And it was hard, but she just really taught me the importance of keeping my grades up and making sure that they were where they needed to be in order for me to get my scholarships and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Did anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned Ms. Burden. I actually know her, and I remember when she joined the district. And there are other teachers like that. There's one teacher over at Central Middle, and he literally just decided, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to take water samples around the school, and then we're going to go out later on and we're going to take soil samples. And it's when teachers actually see their students starting to ask questions that they would not have asked if they weren't giving the opportunity to experience this. That's the encouragement. So it's almost like it's an engine that builds on itself. I put in a little bit, the students put in a little bit more, and before long we have this this cycle going where everything I put in, they put in and puts back into me. So that's one thing that I can definitely say will cause a lot of this to be more of a synergistic kind of deal.
I think too that one of the things I learned from Ruby was the joy of play at work, and I think as long as we can continue to do that as the educators, be it informal or formal, as long as we can continue to explore and play our own things. Ruby was the one who actually brought in some simple science experiments that we just did as staff members with each other as a team building exercise. And then because we were doing it during a low period in the day at the library, some kids wandered in unexpectedly and joined us. And then more kids wandered in and joined us. And so it just reinforced for me that as long as I'm playing at something that I am interested in, I can spread that joy.
Absolutely.
Going off of what Miss Faris was saying, I mean, I can kind of, from my own experience being here as a student and, being a young student, a middle school student, I think, in going from this job, working hands-on, I would completely agree with her. As long as you really enjoy what you're doing, it will always attract students. And I can say that because, we do stuff like welding, and so students get their hands on right away, and so you see you feel that spark, you feel the heat, and all of a sudden students are asking questions like, well, how are these two pieces of metals bonding together? And so that is when you come in and provide those answers for the students. And you learn about gases, you learn about melting temperatures. And another example is for drones. You can fly a drone right away, and the students, you play video games, usually you're pretty good at it right away. And so then you can start introducing those concepts like, well, how do drones actually work? How do they propel? And there's all kinds of science and lessons that you can introduce through that, and also make it fun for students and engaging.
So let me ask you guys, when you're thinking about working with this particular age group, right? When I think about 11, 12, 13-year-olds, they tend to be figuring out who they're going to be, right? Like that's a very crucial time, like which friends or which path am I kind of going to go down? And I'm wondering have you seen in your work anything specific that you're like, this is how does it draw them in, or how do you utilize it to really leverage this kind of identity crisis that they're going through at that particular stage in their development?
Well, the first thing is, you have to talk to students at this age to find out kind of where their head is and kind of like what they're interested in. And then from there, then start connecting some of the dots. Again, thinking about, back on history. So when I started teaching in New Orleans, it was right after Katrina. So I had students who were literally helping their parents build homes or go back in with sheetrock and things of that nature. So at the time I was teaching geometry, and we started talking about square footage and how that equals like dollars, so that they understood, okay, if I have a piece of sheetrock that's 4 by 8, but again, that was after talking to them to find out, what are you doing? And so part of being a educator is having that talent, that skill, where you could take an apple and an orange and make them seem so similar that if you ask a kid, are these the same? Immediately, yes, they're the same. They're both fruit, as opposed to them thinking that, they're so far removed from the content or so far removed from the subject matter that they can never access it.
Right. So again, it feels like I'm hearing relevancy. I'm hearing, trusted adults who are excited and having fun, and then they share that. I'm curious because, of course, the school district, Minddrive, the library sees quite a few kids of color that come into to those organizations. And so if you were to think about an organization that is not drawing in kids of color, right? What kind of suggestions or advice would you give them in order to expand, access to students of color to be a part of their programs? Is there anything that you would tell them to think about? I mean, we got relevancy, we got be excited about what you're doing, but is there anything else, some other specific suggestions you might have?
I think from my experience of working, with other organizations who might not be as, informed in creating opportunities for students, I think efforts have been made to provide students with equal opportunities to like highly qualified educators or resources. But in order to really achieve engagement between students, middle school students, I think you always need to provide more team activities rather than coursework, and more tools for the constantly increasing of diverse students and to meet the needs that they need specifically.
I think I would also go back to my active listening thing, that active listening for kids is what I was saying, but I think it's also organizations actively listening to other organizations that are being successful in diversity initiatives. Observation, just go watch. As we expanded what it meant to be a library and learning, I went to other libraries that were doing it, but also other organizations that had nothing to do with libraries, to see what they were doing and to learn from them and actively hear what they were hearing and what they were doing and seeing.
Thank you. Felenia, could you maybe talk a little bit about, you had shared with me that when you first met Miss Ina and she started to introduce you to STEM programs, you weren't necessarily seeing a lot of other students your age getting involved. What would be your recommendation of why were they hesitant to be involved? And what might you recommend to folks to help get them more involved?
I think that most of the students of color weren't involved because maybe they were too scared to take the risk or just be a part of something that, would help you throughout your life. And let's see, maybe I can tell them that it is important to make sure that you just give it a chance and just see if you like it. STEM seems like I wouldn't say it is a great opportunity for people. So if you just allow yourself to have the chance to get some experience with it, you may like it and it may get students more involved in the program.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Phil, were you going to add something there?
There's so much to say about that. One thing that I do want to say is for those that want to diversify or have a more inclusive base of students, in some ways they need to have a more inclusive base of decision makers. It's hard to say that I want to serve a community, but I don't want to open up the leadership to the community that I'm wanting to serve. And that's where I think some things, it needs to start there.
Absolutely. And so, so in the leadership, you need to diversify your leadership. And then also, what do we think about parental involvement? Like really having parental voice at the time.
Well, I can kind of speak directly to the parental voice in that it is very hard for parents to really be engaged with students. And here's what I mean by that. Both of my parents are highly educated. My mother had a PhD. My father, he was a judge. But the thing about it is, for them to do that, I had to go live with my grandparents. And so there's a sacrifice that we're not really addressing, in that you'll have parents that want to spend the time with their children, but they still have to pay bills. They still have other commitments that in the long run will help the family. And if you don't have that nuclear multi-generational household, then things could be missed. I can really be honest and say, if it were not for the fact that my grandparents were already retired when I was living with them, I may not be where I am right now, because I wouldn't have had that constant guidance of an adult at home to keep me doing the homework, to keep me engaged, but also to be talking to me about all these different things. And so that's one thing that I have to say with parents, it's difficult, because sometimes people assume that it's not that they want to engage, or they don't care, or more things are important, but it's just that there are other pressing things that are keeping them from being able to be as engaged or involved as they would like to be.
You reminded me, in our previous conversation, I'd love for you to share this with everyone too, is the conversation about the sacrificing of earning potential. So we're talking.
So one of the things that I found, and this is as a college professor, and then even as a professional researcher, that when you were the first to go to college, you didn't get there on your own. So like, for example, with my parents, it was because of the sacrifices of their parents that they were able to go and get as high education as possible. Then once they get that education, there is kind of like a survivor's guilt, where it's like, okay, now I have to take care of those family members that invested in me. If you look at education, it is not a profession where you're going to get paid a lot. So if you're going to make the choice as a person of color to then enter into education, as opposed to going a professional route where you could make far more money, you're doing it at the expense of some family member, whether it is a parent or whether it's a child. And that's a hard ask sometimes. And one that we really have to look at, like, how can we help to make that gap something that's not as large. I remember when I switched over from the professional to being an educator, my wife was upset. She was, I mean, mad. And it took some years for her to be like, oh, okay. But the students that I helped would come back, and sometimes we would even see them like at grocery stores and things like that. And she started to see, okay, I see how you're doing this, but still it's hitting our pockets. And that is something that is a very hard conversation to have, and it's a very real conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very valid point. And just wanting to bring back around the need for resources, the need for excited and talented teachers to be talking about STEM, right? For it can't be rote, as Brittany said, for this age group. You got to give them hands-on things where they can play and where they can do stuff together. And that takes money and time and all of those things. And so as we think about how we're closing this racial gap in STEM, these are some things that have to be addressed at a systemic level. So so I just want to thank you all for bringing up some really good kind of jumping off points for us here. We, I think, are running tight on time. And so we're going to move to the Q&A, see if Chrissy has some questions for you all. And we can go.
I do. I have some really good questions. I'm going to start with my first question is for Crystal. Was there any in-group differences in the study that results based on race? I'm sorry, I messed that up. I'm going to ask that again. Was there any in-group differences in the study's results based on race?
Well, the inside the teenage brain, that frontline research was done in the late 90s, and it did not, as I remember, it did not really address race. The things that I have read since then, it has discussed trauma, the impact of trauma, but not particularly race. I think one of the things that I did hear recently, I think it was the Annie E. Casey Foundation had a speaker or something recently, that one of the things that she took from the research, I think there's still more happening. It's an ongoing research. I'm hoping that they're addressing any differences that there are in race. But the Annie E. Casey Foundation person, I think, said something along the lines of, she took hope from the fact that with adult relationships, that there weren't necessarily differences. And I think that's one of the things that we were all discussing a little bit here, is that, you know, these engaged teachers, the grandparents that were there for us, the family members that support us, maybe there aren't differences in the way our brains can develop. I don't know. I'll do some more digging and see if I find out some more research and share that with you all.
We look forward to what you find, Crystal. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to give this next question to Dr. Phil. What's the most important thing that teachers can do to close the racial gap in STEM? And if you could, for me, focus particularly on those middle school years. What can teachers do in those middle school years?
The middle school years are when you finally have a class that's just devoted to science. So for those teachers, that's when exposure is so important. And literally, it's like trying to do as many hands-on things as possible and showing science in all these different areas, going beyond the textbook. Because again, with middle school and secondary education, if I only have to, focus on science, and I'm doing this multiple times during the day, I can literally say, okay, we're going to spend this day doing X, and then getting the resources, getting the supplies to do that. Now, one of the things that I have to say with our district is that was one of the intentional things that we did as far as the teachers, making sure that they had what they needed. Because you find that science is one of these content areas where it costs a lot of money to do. I mean, you think, $20 here, $15 there for like every single project. And if you're only doing like, small ones, yeah, it's fine for a month. But to sustain this throughout the school year, you really need some assistance. And so that is the real thing, trying to make sure that one, they have the resources to do it, and then having the time to set up to literally make the classroom more engaging, more interactive than it would be if you just did everything all digital, or everything using a textbook or handouts, or things of that nature.
So that ties in a little bit to my next question, because Brittany, this one's for you. And you mentioned team activities as opposed to coursework. So you've kind of answered this, but if you could expand on that. So in addition to the digital divide, what are other barriers that you have observed, Brittany, that are causing the racial gaps in STEM? And you already spoke to the strategies to overcome them, but what are the barriers that you have identified?
I think, and I kind of answered this a little bit also on the chat right now. I think one of the main ones is keeping students engaged and kind of making it relatable to them, because students, if you put a drone in front of them and let them fly, they're always going to be interested, but how can we make that more relevant and exciting and empowering to them so that they can see the importance of it, and also make it engaging for parents, and so that they can keep bringing their kids back to us. And so I think one of the most important things is making sure that what we're teaching is relevant to their community and their experiences. And by that, we can make a community that is, it takes a village to raise a child. We always say that. And as Dr. Jones mentioned, I think parents would be way more interested in bringing their students to classes, STEM classes, and, if they can understand a little bit more and how that's going to affect them in the future.
Thank you very much for that, Brittany. Felania, this is a question for you. How did you know that accounting was right for you?
So I started to take an accounting class, an entry-level accounting class, when I was a freshman, my spring semester. And I just like dealing with the money, and I'm a cashier too. So I like counting money and looking at statistics and figuring out things. So I like problem solving. And I'm like, okay, maybe this is something that I really like doing for the rest of my life. So I was just able to get the experience with my job, dealing with money and, figuring out how to learn which dollars are counterfeit, which dollars are not. It just made me feel good about myself. And I think that this is something that I'll be happy with.
Very good. So she turned her love of money into a money paying job. Very good. All right, we have more questions, of course, but I'm going to save those for our after session. And I'm going to turn this back over to Andrea to wrap up our formal session here. Thank you all.
All right. We just want to say thank you all for coming today and having this conversation with us, and for all of the folks who were on the chat and listening in. We really appreciate you taking the time. But if you are willing to stay, I'll make this short so we can get to the Q&A. If you're willing to stay another 10 minutes, they can, the panelists, I think, are all willing to stay as well. And we can answer a few more of your questions. So I just want to say thank you. We're going to formally end this at 12:30. Wish you all a wonderful day, and invite you to come next week when we will focus on the high school experience, and then the week after, which will kind of be our culminating session. And if you get the link to the survey after this, it would be great if you filled it out for us. We'd appreciate it. Have a wonderful week. Bye. Or see you in a few minutes. Back to you, Chrissy.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up, get us started. So just so we respect everyone's time. This question is for all. And Dr. Phil, if you could kick us off with the answer to this question. Is the racial gap in STEM education closing, or is it widening? And whatever your answer is, why?
Okay, so when we talk about the racial gap as it relates to STEM, in some ways, unfortunately, I think it's widening. And part of the reason that it's widening is because as we shift more to a technology-based experience, drones, things of that nature, where now the dollar amount to get in has gone up, you will find that is going to be where you get some separation. The other thing that, I also see is, if you're looking at some of our core areas, you'll find that you don't have the retention with teachers like you have in some of the outlining areas. So if you have a teacher who does not have the experience or doesn't have the content knowledge to be able to make all these connections, as opposed to a veteran teacher that does, you'll see that your students who have that new teacher may stay at just the surface level, whereas the one that has been doing this for 15 years or 10 years, they're able to go deeper, which means that their students will get a more robust experience. And as we said, those middle school years are very important because it kind of starts laying down the foundation of, well, I think I want to explore this a little bit more in high school. And now that I've explored it in high school, I think I want to go this way in college, or I think I want to go this way as far as a trade, or this way as far as an occupation. Because not everyone is going to go into a four-year university, but when you don't have those experiences early enough, it delays everything else. And so, that I do think that it is getting wider.
Thank you for that. Brittany, I'd like to know what you think what your thoughts are on that question.
Well, I think working directly with both middle school and high school and kind of seeing them transition into their professional careers, I think definitely it should not be, the gap should not be wider, but it's definitely feels like it's getting wider. And I think mostly because as Dr. Jones mentioned, not everybody's going to end up going to a four-year university, and not everybody has these formative experiences as when you're going into middle school. And so I think empowering students and definitely creating a community where they can explore all these options and know that, it's not necessary for them to go into college, that there's many other careers that they could also go into. And us as educators being able to expose them to those options, I think it's very necessary. I mean, our graduates is a good mixture of 50%, 51% going into, 4-year professional degrees, and then the other half choosing to do something else and not really getting to know that until they're at the end of their high school years. And, it's kind of sad to see that they could have, been exposed to that much earlier and been able to, maybe graduate with some sort of certification or some sort of already, feeling a little bit more ready to go out into the world is what, I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, thank you so much for those thoughts, Brittany. The theme is happening over and over again. I'm hearing it is exposure. So in line with that, Crystal, I have a question for you. What role can libraries play in that exposure and in closing that racial gap?
Well, I think that the libraries have a significant role because of their location and their openness. I also think that just as we discuss resources, urban libraries suffer from a lack of resources, just as urban school districts suffer from a lack of resources. And until we can really address the equity issues in resources, I don't know that we'll actually win this battle.
Andrea, can you add to that for us, please? Any additional thoughts to what Crystal said?
In terms of what libraries can do?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I got a little depressed on that part, Crystal.
Sorry.
Resources are important. I agree. I think that what the libraries do, and the libraries across the country do this, is they do offer, first of all, access to free programs, right? So pretty much everything at the library is free. So when they have maker spaces and digital media labs and, STEAM activities, those are, available to anyone who wants to attend. And so that's one of the things that the libraries can do, because they're this kind of neutral ground for many people. They feel like it's a safe space to bring their kids. And We have seen, and I think I've seen this in conversations with other people around the country in libraries, is that we have seen some surgence of tweens coming to the library, right? Because they're in that middle ground where parents will drop them off and let them be a part of programs, and parents feel a connection to the library. So there is opportunity there for us to really develop programming that meets this middle age demographic.
And it hasn't been a demographic that we've necessarily seen in the past. And so figuring out the best path forward, I think, is key for us.
And I also want to say the other thing is about the pathway connection. I feel like I've heard, and I talked to Dr. Phil previously, I don't know if we mentioned it here, but even in his thinking at the school district is like, how do you really start elementary, middle school, and then make the connection to high school? And I think that's true for all of us as organizations that are doing this work. How do we really support each other and connect? If we're doing exploratory stuff at the library, who's doing more in-depth work that when a kid is ready for it, we can say, hey, this is a program for you. I think that needs to be more intentional in our community about how we're connecting young people to these opportunities and at what stage in their development.
Excellent thought. What stage in their development? I like that. So that's going to lead me to my next question with Felania. Think back for me, Felania, to your middle school years. In addition to focusing on grades, so we know right there in middle school, that's that pivotal time. What did you do in middle school, or what other things attributed to your success?
So I did participate in, I participated in student council, and we were able to do hands-on activities with each other. And it motivated me to just make sure that I'm always on top of everything and making sure that I was able to cooperate with others and learn from other people. So it really helped me just think of, like, when I became a high school student, I was able to work with others as well, because I learned that from middle school. And I think that that is something that is important, is to, always be aware that you can always learn from other people and learn from other students and work with other students to, learn about the things. And sometimes it can help you get better grades when you think about that when you're doing your work. It's like, okay, I can get my work done. I can get great grades if I decide to put in the amount of effort.
Very good. So I heard involvement, I heard effort, I heard collaboration with peers. Very good. Thank you.
No problem.
So this is a question for everyone, for the whole panel, and I will let Brittany, if you could kick this one off for me. What is your advice to others to gain students' trust?
I think one of the biggest things that I even do with my students, is when students are permitted to fail in something and maybe not be so good at it. I think that is definitely one of the tools where students learn a better sense of who they can go to for help, what kind of help they need, and advocate for themselves and learn who to trust and be willing to take more opportunities and take more onto their plates. And I think definitely that is one of the things that is core, with our program. And I think a lot more people should, be open to having students do.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily, fail and, but in a way where it's a learning experience for the student.
Can I piggyback on hers? Because I think because I just think this is so key, is the relationship building. And I would say letting them see you fail, letting the adults not be perfect, letting them see that adults, we don't know everything, and that we're learning sometimes right alongside them. And when we are trying to figure it out and we can't quite, and all of a sudden they have more information than we have, there is a leveling of the power dynamic that is really important, and that allows you to start to build authentic relationships.
Yes, letting the students know that none of us are perfect. We all fail. That builds trust. I feel like that's a great way to wrap this up. Thank you so much to all of you who stayed on and listened to this great discussion. Thank you once again, Andrea, for your great leadership in moderating this. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. We'll be right back here next week as we discuss the high school years and strategies for closing the racial gap there. So thank you all. I appreciate you, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.